We begin with the war in Ukraine, where 4 days of surprise border incursions have seen Ukraine strike a military airfield and make territorial gains within Russia, and within the last couple of hours we're hearing of that Russian attack on a Ukrainian supermarket. These pictures have been shared on social media and have been verified by our team. Ukraine's interior minister says at least 10 people have been killed in the missile attack in the Donetsk region, and we're also seeing an updated figure on the number of injured. That's 45 people injured, he says. A post office was also hit. President Zelensky shared these pictures of what he said was the scene of the attack. He says people are trapped in the rubble, and as Ukraine's offensive within Russia continues, Russia says it's moving troops and munitions to the border region. Ukraine's latest assault was a drone attack on an air base about 300 kilometers inside Russia. Pictures released by the Russian Defense Ministry show the target being hit by Ukrainian forces. Sources in Ukraine security services told the BBC several dozen fighter jets and helicopters at the base were also hit, as well as munitions, warehouses, and 4 Russian villages near the airbase have been evacuated, while Ukraine is planning to evacuate 20,000 of its citizens who live close to its Russian ground offensive. Our correspondent in Kyiv, James Waterhouse, sent this update on the supermarket attack. It's quite the day already. I mean, let's start with Konstantinica, where we're seeing some pretty troubling images of a supermarket on fire now. What we're being told is that it's being directly hit by a Russian missile. Now this is a city which is sort of along this string of settlements in the eastern Donetsk region, where Russian forces are continuing to push, and this is a kind of place where people get used to daily airstrikes and the residual threat of approaching invading troops. It's a very difficult existence for people there already. It reminds me of when a DIY store was targeted in the northeastern city of Har back in May, when the Russians launched a cross-border incursion. Around there we're talking about civilians going about their day really. And so yeah, the images are certainly, doesn't look good for Konstantina. But sadly this is part and parcel of daily life in the east of Ukraine. Meanwhile, our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has been looking at how the Ukrainian incursion is being viewed there. While I was reading the Russian papers today, and they were really interesting. I mean, keep in mind that most of the Russian papers that are still printed and published in this country are controlled by the state, but what comes through when you read these stars today is this sort of begrudging recognition by Moscow that Ukraine's cross-border attack has been pretty successful so far. So for example, there's this paper, this is Mazovsky Camel, it's popular tabloid, and it quotes first of all from the relatively new Russian defense minister who said that it's okay making mistakes, but you mustn't lie, and the paper says we have to recognize that this cross-border assault was a strong move by the Zelensky regime, which has caused unpleasant consequences for Russia. This is another very pro-Kremlin Russian paper, is Viesta, and it says that the enemy, in other words the Ukrainian army, is acting skillfully and daringly according to all the rules of the art of war. It said it's been using drones as air cover for its tactical groups, and then it brought in reserves and battalion tactical groups, which have attacked in various parts of KK region. And that's quite interesting. I think that reflects the realization here in Moscow that it's very difficult to put a positive spin on what's been happening in southern Russia over the last 4 days. Let's speak now to Matthew Saville, who is Director of Military Sciences at the defense think tank ROSI and a former civil servant in the Ministry of Defense. Matthew, thank you very much for your time today. We're absorbing the news and getting updates about this attack on the supermarket in the east of Ukraine, near Donetsk. But I want to ask you first of all, how significant is this attack by Ukraine on the Russian airbase afternoon, Anna? I mean that the attack on the airbase might actually complement the ground operations that have started this week in and Kursk, but it's probably also part of the ongoing Ukrainian drone campaign against targets deeper into Russia, and that split out over sort of Russian infrastructure, ammunition, and logistics points, but the air-based targets are twofold: the very long-range ones, where the large Russian bombers are launching from, which launch the cruise missiles and things that hit are particularly Ukrainian civilian targets and their infrastructure, and then in places like the Petsa, that's where the jets that are using particularly the glide bombs are being flown from, and they are attacking Ukrainian forces, as particularly around the north and Har, and so they've got targets in Lead K and Vors that they've been going after for some time. So what's Ukraine's strategy, or indeed strategies? Here, is it about drawing Russian troops away from other parts of the front line? Is it about saying to the US and other allies, keep on backing us? Well, I think that the strikes on the air bases are about trying to kind of push back those Russian aircraft that have been posing some of the greatest threats to Ukraine forces, and some of these are the targets that they would like to be hitting with things like the attack on ground-based ballistic missile provided by the Americans, although some of the extreme end of that, which is why using drones, the Kursk incursion could be about adding to that pressure on Russian forces that tried to threaten Kyiv, although that attack unstalled a few weeks back. That there is also a political element to this, which is that it could be about signaling to the West that they're still in this fight, reversing the narrative of the past 6 months, where a lot of that has been about Russian pressure, and frankly embarrassing the Russians and really striking a blow to their prestige. But we still don't really know what the full scale and duration of this ground incursion is going to look like. So based on that comment, what do you think Russia's response will look like? We're already getting reports of the movements of some Russian troops to the region where Ukraine has launched this ground incursion. They do seem to have been caught on the hop, and that suggests that the Ukrainians have improved some of their operational security problems, which beveled them last year, because the Russians have pretty good advanced warning. A lot of their activity. The Russians also initially claimed that they had already repulsed this attack, and that has demonstrably not been the case. Who would expect them to use the reserves that they've got to rush them to the front? That seems to be taking some time, and maybe we need to take another look at exactly how flexible Russian forces are. They don't yet seem to have been pulling forces away from further south around the Donbass, and that attack still seems to be grinding its way forward. So there's probably a bit of observing exactly how much the Russians have actually got in reserve and how good their deeper defenses are. I think if we look back to the Wagner insurrection a while back, actually it turned out they weren't anywhere near as coordinated their front lines as you expected them to be. Okay, Matthew Saville from the defense think tank Russi. Thanks for watching. For more details, like, share, subscribe and press bell icon.